Coming up next on Adventurer, part 2 of our exclusive interview with David Breashears, director of the new Storm Over Everest movie on PBS. Stick around. Clash, James Clash. Welcome to Adventurer, the show with guests who truly push their lives to the limits. No talking heads here, just the real deals. I'm your host, Jim Clash. Today we have David Breashears back to talk more about his experiences on Everest. Welcome back, David.
Well, here I am again.
You know, we talked a little bit about Storm Over Everest in the last show. I want to talk a little bit, go back to 1996 when you were on the mountain with the Imax crew and you took Jomling Norgay, Tenzing Norgay's son, to the summit. What a great story. Talk a little bit about that. You guys had to stick around after the disaster. It must have been hard.
Well, that is sort of the reason that I wanted to make Storm Over Everest, is because of what we all went through in 1996. So the IMAX film of 96 is just very linked to Storm Over Everest.
Right.
But Jomling was on that expedition for a number of reasons. First of all, we wanted a Sherpa to be very well represented in the movie, not just as a load carrier, but as in a prominent position as climbing leader. And then we wanted someone to give us a link to that the history that Edmund Hillary was standing on top of Everest May 29th, 1953 with a Sherpa,
right.
Tenzing Norgay. So he just brought so many things to the film, you know, especially for me. The reason I started climbing, I think, was because when I was 11, I opened a book about mountains and saw that famous picture Hillary had taken of Tenzing on the top. And there I was on May 23rd, 1996 with Jomling.
His son?
Yeah, 43 years later. And it was such a tough year because we did climb past the bodies of Scott Fisher.
You saw him?
Yeah, and Rob Hall. And their stories are told in Storm Over Everest, you know, and what we think happened on that mountain in 1996, what happened to Rob Hall and Doug Hansen on the traverse from the Hillary Step to the South Summit is told in Storm Over Everest. That year we weren't in the storm in 1996. We saw the survivors. They greatly affected us.
But you knew, you guys held back, right? I mean, you were on the mountain at the same time, but you had a feeling there was going to be a storm, didn't you?
We were at Camp 3 beginning our summit ascent, and that would have put us as the first team on top that year. And we wanted to be early on the mountain so there weren't a lot of footsteps and people up there. In the IMAX film, we should have an empty mountain. Yeah. And the wind was blowing very hard that night at Camp 3, and so I consulted with Ed Wiesters and Robert Schauer, the great Austrian climber, and we said it's too windy. Not that it's too windy, the mountain seemed unsettled.
Yeah.
And then we turned and looked down, and there they were all coming, 65 people. That was Rob Hall's team, Scott Fisher's team, the Taiwanese, remember that South African team?
Yep.
And we just said, no, you know, if we get stopped up there because of high winds in the high camp, we're going to be joined by all these people. We can't and we just went down. No one knew a storm was coming. It wasn't forecast. No, it was just windy.
Yeah.
And wind is to be expected on Everest.
Yeah.
The
storm.
storm.
In some ways, you were lucky.
We were prudent, careful, experienced mountaineers. I don't think there was any luck involved in that. But what we did do in Storm Over Everest was recreate the storm and the ferocity of that storm, because they all describe it, and you'll see it in the film.
Sure.
A storm that came up the mountain, and you expect storms to kind of come over the horizon.
Yeah, supposed to.
And not only was it coming up the mountain, we saw it. It was a black gray cloud up through base camp. You'll see it in the film. Storm Over Everest just shows this thing coming up, and then they were descending into it, tired, exhausted, and then night fell, and everything's history. Yeah, everything fell apart.
Well, I can't wait to see this movie. Again, it's May 13th on PBS, Frontline.
On Frontline.
Clash, James Clash.